Welcome back to Clarkston Lighthouse Guidance. I am Chandler Fleming, owner and lead therapist at Clarkston Lighthouse Counseling.
And I'm Victoria Fleming, co-owner and therapist at Clarkston Lighthouse Counseling. In our show, we discuss and explore psychological topics that affect us all, including relationships, parenting, and issues such as depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. We draw on our training and experience to help guide you through life's challenges.
Please let us know what subjects interest you by sending those ideas to our Facebook page. In some shows, we will answer questions from our viewers. Also, send those questions in, and you may find us talking about them on the air.
Today's topic, Relationship Skills 101, Communication Skills. We are all in relationships, work, school, friends, neighbors, but our romantic relationships, our intimate relationships are often the most important, but these are also the most challenging. And there's no exact recipe for a happy relationship. Today, we will provide some important ingredients for good communication in your relationship.
You know, I frequently tell this story at the beginning of a lot of trainings that I do. Back in 1999-ish, we were, my wife and I and some friends were in the Outer Banks, and the waves were just awesome. There was actually a hurricane about 2 or 3 days out, and we weren't very bright. I was younger and dumber at the time. I don't recommend this, but we were body surfing in these huge waves. The waves were literally 35 feet high. And you know, I had a comfort with the ocean. I had been a lifeguard before. I kind of knew how to handle the ocean. So a friend of mine took the first wave, was kind of body surfing in, and I took the next wave, and I pretty much ran into him and said to him, "Hey, are you okay?" And he goes, "No." I said, "Well, what's wrong?" He says, "I can't make it to shore." So I was quite a bit taller than him, and I kind of like held him up in the air, and we fought the waves. And after about 15 minutes of fighting the waves, we finally landed on the shore exhausted. And as we're sitting there, I kind of felt stupid. It was like, I did all the things wrong. I was a lifeguard. I taught these things. I read the signs. You know, if you're caught in a tidal wave, you're supposed to swim parallel to the shore and let the current take you in. But at the moment that I needed it the most, I had forgotten. So that's a little bit about what our training is today. Communication is a very common topic, and you may have some information about it. Hopefully we'll provide some new information, but also I hope that this information will be on the top of your head, that in that moment of crisis when you need it, you can remember those things, just like I needed to remember that when I got caught in the big wave.
Absolutely, because most research shows that communication is one of the biggest challenges in any relationship. I mean, right off the bat, you've got some gender differences. You've got gender differences where women use about 25,000 words a day, whereas men...
Well, men speak about 5,000. About 5,000 words a day, the average man speaks throughout the day.
So that's a big difference. That's a really big difference. And so one tip in communicating is that women need to get to the point a little sooner. Whereas men...
You know, we need to remember to use emotional words and be less direct. And it's interesting, a lot of people will say that their mate, a female, will ask them a question like, "What do you think about this?" And they'll say, "I just told them what they asked." It usually doesn't work as well. And remember your emotional words. Men will very oftentimes say things in a fashion that's very definitive. So, what do you think we should do? I think we should do this. And oftentimes that doesn't resonate well with a woman. So you got to remember those emotional words. You know, what I feel would be good is this, and be much more indirect, be less direct.
And the reality is for either, whether it's with 25,000 words or 5,000, is both need to remember to speak respectfully and to recognize tone, and that nonverbals are very important. So as we dive into this topic, we need to ask ourselves, as we start a communication with someone very important to us, what is the goal? What is it that I'm wanting to accomplish? Is my goal really to fight, or is my goal to connect?
Hey, I want to win. That's very important. I want to win. Well, maybe not. Maybe I don't want to win. Because in fighting, there's a winner and a loser. In connecting, there can be cooperation, and the relationship can greatly improve.
And I know a question I'll ask myself sometimes is, what is more important here, relationship or being right? And in the end, the relationship is far more important to me than being right. So let's dive into some communication tips.
I think what's really important is not only the spoken words, the literal words, that we remember our nonverbal communication, our tone, and things along those lines. I actually worked in a psychiatric hospital before, and somebody pointed out to me, he said to me, "You're a blowfish." And I said, "What do you mean by that, a blowfish?" He says, "Every time things get stressful, you sit up really high and you stick your chest out." I said, "I don't do that." He goes, "You do." But I didn't believe him. And a couple days down the road, somebody was kind of getting a little bit violent, and I'm standing there, and my friend comes up to me and goes like this to me. You know what? That wasn't the posture I wanted to communicate. Oftentimes, I see so many people, when they get worked up, they're kind of giving that finger, that pointing things out. So sometimes you even have to practice in a mirror to see what really you look like.
Because we often don't recognize, like you said, you didn't know you were puffing up. You know, you didn't know, and very often we can have a scowl on our face or our tone. You know, it's like that phrase, "I'm sorry." "I'm sorry" can have a lot of different qualities. But what do we do, Chandler, when we need to communicate something that's hard, something that's just really challenging, something the other person may or may not want to hear?
You know, and I think communicating the tough stuff is the toughest. You know, some couples, to be honest, they struggle with the easy stuff. You know, just talking, how was your day, and making those basic connections. But I think it takes a higher level of skill really to deal with issues of criticism. Some of the background and training I have is from the Gottman Institute. It's a great resource for relationship sort of stuff. And one of the things that they talk about in their training through the Gottman Institute is that most people do not respond well to criticism. Even those, they interview people, "Hey, how do you respond to criticism?" "Oh, I do well." But they really don't. When you put them on a lie detector test sort of thing, where they monitor their vital signs, their blood pressure, it usually goes through the roof. If you look at brain activity, the brain activity is really, really high, and those areas of the panic center of the brain, they tend to be going off. So it's really, really important to learn how to deal with criticism. And one of those things is really two techniques I want to talk about. One is taking out the trash.
Ooh, taking out the trash. Sounds like maybe criticism that needs to be said and aired out?
Yeah, I
or
think so.
Gotten out of the house? Like, I don't want to keep my trash in my house. What are you talking about, taking out the trash?
Sure. Well, you know, trash, if it sits around, it starts to decay and stink. And there's some areas in relationships that we really want to say to somebody, but we know it's a sensitive subject. And so I really encourage clients that are in therapy with me to work on taking out the trash. And you set up a meeting, and the best thing about taking out the trash is you just get it off your chest. Your partner really shouldn't respond unless they actually have to, but it's, "Hey, I gotta let you know that when you compare me to my mother, it drives me crazy. And I know you're joking when you say it, but that's something that really hurts. So I just wanna let you know that." And there's not really a commitment from the other person, not an explanation. It's not a time to be defensive, but it's just a time to get things off your chest.
Okay, so I can see the importance of getting some things off your chest and not letting it build up and stink. But I would also think that there are good ways to present a criticism, to vent your feelings, and there are probably some not so good ways. What would be some good ways to be able to say, "It makes me really angry when," versus ways that may really escalate a fight?
Sure. And that's one of the things that I really rely on the research done by the Gottman Institute. And they have a technique they call slow startup. And slow startup involves obviously starting out slow, but it starts with a very apologetic almost way of bringing up the subject. You beat around the bush a little bit. You say things like, "You know, there's something I've really been wanting to talk to you, and I know this may be difficult, and my intentions are not to hurt you." But so you definitely start in a kind of beat around the bush kind of manner, and then you state your feelings. And it's important that your feeling is a really feeling. oftentimes people will say things like, oh, I feel that's not a good idea. Well, that's not really a feeling. Feelings are like, I'm sad, I'm frustrated, I'm confused, I'm hurt.
So it'd be maybe it is difficult for me, or I find myself feeling frustrated when the dishes are left in the sink and I ask you to please clean them. Would that be a slow startup?
That could be a slow startup. Again, the more apologetic at the beginning, the easier.
Okay.
And then, so you state your feeling, and then you try to be as situational as possible and as personal or not personal as possible. So you may say, I feel really frustrated when I find the dishes in the sink, and you leave it there, because there is the implication of, how did the dishes end up and what your expectations were, but you really try to leave the person out of it, and whenever possible, you just try to communicate it in a way that that it talks about the event and separates the person. And to be honest, a lot of people need practice with that because it's unnatural. We very quickly want to go to a situation where we point the finger at it. It's you.
Mm-hmm. It's why are the dishes in the sink instead of, so what are some of the components of the slow startup?
So slow startup is actually slow startup. You identify the feeling. You try to keep the incident as an incident, not a personal thing. And then if you start up, you have to propose a solution.
Okay.
And one way of kind of proposing that solution is using the phrase, what I think would help is, that the dishes are done when I get home. And again, you're taking that person out of the equation. They understand what you're saying, but people tend to react a lot more if it's just an event and not a person.
Okay.
And then you ask for agreement. You ask them, is this something that you're willing to do?
Okay, so I love the idea of a slow startup and offering a solution, but what about the person receiving the criticism? We're pretty smart and we still know the underlying is, and you didn't do the dishes.
Receiving criticism can be quite difficult. And our first reaction tends to be to defend ourselves. But defensiveness usually doesn't work well. So what I recommend is at any point, even if your partner isn't good at giving criticism, that you work on restatement. So you repeat what you heard and you try to acknowledge the feeling, even if they didn't give you a feeling.
Okay.
So an example of that might be the dishes again. They may say, why don't you ever clean the dishes? And so, hey, what I hear is that you're frustrated that I don't do the dishes. And it sounds like you're frustrated. I acknowledge that that's difficult. And then the really important key to this is really owning as much as you can. I encourage people to own 102% that, I do see how that could be frustrating. And I do remember you bringing that up to me in the past, that I remember you saying to me, hey, that is something that kind of gets on your nerves. So you try to own as much as possible. And then if you're able to do that, oftentimes most of the battle is settled at that place.
That's
People
right.
tend to calm down when they feel heard.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's important to make your partner feel heard. And then after that, you may want to agree with what they have to say. If they had a solution, you want to agree to their solution. Or if you don't agree with their solution, it's your responsibility to come up with another solution.
Okay.
And they may say, hey, the solution is you do the dishes. You may not be willing to do that. Now, maybe in the relationship, that would be the best solution, but you want to stay on the current subject and you want to come up with your solution. Hey, how about on odd days I do the dishes? You know what? And even if you can't agree, it's really important to voice an intention of the positive. You know what? I don't want you to feel angry. I want you to feel supported. I am willing to think about ways of making this situation better. So when you take that defensiveness piece out and you own as much as you possibly can, and some things you may not feel are your fault or for you to blame, but at least if you acknowledge how that other person is feeling, it's really, really important.
So rather than be defensive, and we want to stay, I like what you said about staying current. We don't want to go into the past. This isn't the taking out the trash time. This is addressing a specific issue,
Yes.
right? Okay, so we don't want to be defensive. Instead, we'd want to be assertive.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so as we dive into assertiveness, I want to look at some things that assertiveness is not, because that can be as important in understanding what it is as what it's not. Assertiveness is not aggressiveness. Assertiveness is not passiveness. And assertiveness is not passive aggressiveness. But let's take each one of those one at a time. All right, so assertiveness isn't aggressiveness. What exactly? You got a bulldozer, for aggressiveness. What is aggressiveness?
Aggressiveness is violating the rights of others in order to get your message out. Aggressiveness is like a bulldozer. It runs people over. People who communicate in aggressive ways, they have a loud voice, they threatening posture, sometimes they have angry gestures, sometimes they even make harsh or threatening statements. So it's important to recognize that. And people who are aggressive sometimes get what they want, but oftentimes they don't, because the other person gets aggressive back and they don't want to give in. You know what? If somebody makes me angry, I usually don't want to help them.
And sometimes what I find is aggressiveness will actually go into our next one, passiveness. You can have sometimes in communication one person who's trying to be a bulldozer, but the other person will be passive. So let's talk a little bit, what is passiveness?
Right. So passive communication oftentimes is non-communication. Passive people who, they rarely say what they want, and they rarely get what they want because they don't ask for it. So it's important to remember that in passive people, sometimes they make poor eye contact, soft voice, things along those lines. I think all of us know to some degree that frequently people who start off passive, they explode. They go from being very, very passive and they lose it and they become aggressive.
Okay, and then we've got the two combined, and I think it's a misunderstood concept, is that passive aggressive. So what is passive aggressive?
Passive aggressive is a form of aggressiveness. You really are violating the rights of other people. You're bullying and being mean in a way that's indirect. So it's an indirect way. It's a lot like a sniper. You've been hit, but you're not really sure where it comes from. I used to have a friend, he was the king of passive aggressive. He used to tap his fingers and you ask him, please stop it. And then he'd stop for a little bit and then he'd go again. He'd go, oh, I'm doing it again, aren't I? He definitely knew what he's doing. Oftentimes people are forgetful. Hey, I forgot to take out the trash, or I forgot your birthday. Oftentimes passive aggressive is accidentally on purpose. So I accidentally on purpose broke your vase. I accidentally on purpose bumped my shoulder into you. So those are things that are passive aggressive.
And it can be a little harder to address, I would think, because it is a oops. All right, so we don't want to be aggressive, we don't want to be passive, we don't want to be passive aggressive. Those are not healthy forms of communicating. We want to be assertive. So what are the keys to assertiveness?
Keys of assertiveness is a lot like a willow tree. You're strong, but flexible, and you use a pleasant tone of voice, but you're calm. You have a relaxed posture. You don't make threatening words or threatening things. Your eye contact's good. You don't stare the person down, but you do look them in the eye and you make your request known. And of all the communication skills and all the techniques, assertiveness tends to work the best. It's not a guarantee, but people who tend to ask for what they want pleasantly get what they want. And there's a couple other assertive techniques. We talk a lot about I statements. And I statement is I think or I feel about a situation. It's a lot better than using that you statement. And also there's appeal to authority, we call the broken record technique in fogging.
Okay, absolutely. So we're definitely looking at, we don't want to bulldoze people. It's not good. I don't like if I'm talking to someone and they're just laying there and don't have like a doormat and don't have anything to say. Definitely don't like to be sniped, but I like that slow startup, that good eye contact, right? Recognizing the nonverbals. What am I saying with my face that I don't know what I'm saying, or with my tone? So a healthy relationship has I feel frustrated, so I'm owning that I feel frustrated. It's letting you know, and I would really appreciate if. yourself so that we can have good intimate relationships and good communication.
Yeah. A lot of times people ask me things like, how do I know which one to use? When do I take out the trash? And that's something kind of the small things that build up over time. And then when do I use the technique of slow startup? And those are things that you are aware of that are criticisms that affect the other person. And so it's important to start out slow and be a little less direct. And then when do you use assertiveness? Assertiveness is good in relationships where there is a closeness there, but it could be new information, and it could be also areas where there's some confusion. So it's important to remember that too, that if there's areas of confusion, just being assertive, hey, where do you want to go to dinner? That direct, willow tree, kind of flexible, but direct works best.
Absolutely. And remember, our goal is we want to keep the relationship. The relationship is so much more important than being right. So we want to communicate in a way that says, I value you. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any questions, please feel free to call us at 248-245-1809 or email us at guidance@clarkstonlighthousecounseling.com. Thank you.
The views expressed in this show are for general educational purposes only and do not constitute professional advice on any subject matter, nor do they necessarily reflect the views or opinions of its guests or of Independence Television. If mental health assistance is needed, please seek professional licensed treatment.